Well, hi everyone. I'm John Retlin with a retro review of WCW Capital Combat 1990, the return of RoboCop, because Turner was bound and determined to promote RoboCop returning to Turner Home Entertainment, or actually debuting on Turner Home Entertainment because they had gotten the rights for RoboCop 2, I believe, and maybe even RoboCop 1. They were putting a movie character, a fictional movie character, on a wrestling pay-per-view. This was going to end well, and it didn't end well at all. There were actually two really good tag team championship matches and a good main event with a dodgy finish, but it was a tale of two shows. There was a lot of bullshit on this show fitting for the Jim Herd era. So we get cheesy top secret graphics because it's the return of RoboCop. It's in the Capitol, and Shivani welcomes us and tells us about some of the card, and then we get Jim Ross and Bob Caudle calling the show. And it's Kevin Sullivan, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Cactus Jack, not Cactus Jack Manson anymore, that was his actual original name, with Sir Oliver Humperdinck, the Big Kahuna, versus the Road Warriors and Norman the Lunatic. It was Road Warriors' last WCW pay-per-view appearance until, I want to say, 96. They weren't in WCW for very long after that, like it was a few months, but they weren't gonna be they weren't gonna be long for this company because they were looking to cut contracts, and the Road Warriors were getting paid like 10 grand a month or something. Like, they were getting paid a lot of goddamn money. They were making a ton, and they deserved it, but WCW was looking to just run anybody off. Well, namely Jim Herd, because Jim Herd was a goddamn idiot. He created the ding dongs. That's all I need to say right there. It wasn't much of a match, mainly because Kevin Sullivan's shit. The Norman the Lunatic character wasn't all that good. Bam Bam, by this point, was in between this and working in Japan. And eventually, top rope clothesline pin Kevin Sullivan. Good. The worst of the bunch took the pin. We then get Johnny Ace versus Mean Mark Callis with Teddy Long. And man, to take on Mean Mark at this point was a massive undertaking. Do you get it? Do you get it? Why was Johnny Ace ever allowed to wrestle? Because he was absolute shit. I mean, he was fine in the Dynamic Dudes, I guess, but that was because Shane Douglas was carrying that team. And yeah, Johnny Ace really wasn't all that good. Mean Mark hit the heart punch and then jumped off the ropes to do a top rope elbow. 1, 2, 3. There you go. If I'm running through some of these matches and it seems like I don't care, it's because, again, some of this pay-per-view was shit. And some of it you could show a fan today and be like, oh, hey, that's really cool. And some of it you're like, how the fuck did you watch this when you were a kid? I have no idea how I watched this stuff as a kid looking back on it. And then we get the Rock and Roll Express talking about their corporal punishment match, which is just going to be whipping the Freebirds. Going to be belts in the corner. And when you get them into your corner, you can whip them. And they also talked about how Lex Luger had just gotten out of the hospital very recently that morning, according to WCW Brass, because he had a staph infection in his knee. Now, regardless, I do gotta say that's pretty goddamn scary to do that, regardless of whether I think that Luger is a good guy or a murdering piece of shit, or at least complicit in that. But that shows some toughness or some insanity to get out of the hospital and go to wrestle. So, Captain Mike Rotunda would not be long for this company either. He would go on to play IRS in a very taxing role. And Tommy Rich, who is well past his wildfire days by this point, they took on the Samoan SWAT team. And one of the members of the Samoan SWAT team did this match for The Rock, for the people, despite the fact that The Rock was not in wrestling yet. This one wasn't that good. And that was despite the talent. Now, Tommy Rich, by this point, was washed. He really wasn't going to be mainstream for very long. He was kind of just hanging on to the remnants of his days from the early to mid-'80s. But Jesus Christ, this was given 18 minutes. This should have been maybe given 10. Because you kind of had a makeshift team against a Samoan SWAT team who had been around for a bit, but you're thinking, okay, why in the world did it take them 18 minutes to beat two guys that were good in their day, and Rotunda was especially good, but this did not need to go this long. So Rich got the sleeper on Fatu, but then other member clobbers him, and then Fatu gets the pin. 1, 2, 3. Thank God this was over. We then get Teddy Long versus Paul Ellering, in a hair versus hair match. Teddy Long didn't have much hair to lose, but he lost this match, and they cut his hair off, and then people mocked him afterwards. At least Teddy was willing to make himself the butt of jokes, so I'm pretty certain Ole Anderson had something to do with it, because Ole Anderson did not like black people. And if you don't know, you should know. Ole Anderson, not exactly the best guy in wrestling. one of many. Teddy Long does not speak highly of him, and I don't blame him, especially if he was actually treated that way. So, yeah, this one wasn't all that good, but it was like a 2-minute match. It was nothing. We then get Ole, Flair, Arn, and Sid doing an interview. Flair talks about Luger being half the man that he is, and Sid took that inspiration and nearly 10 years later would say that they have half the brain that he does. Oh, wait, he has half the brain that they do. Because Sid, much like me, can't figure out how words work. But, Sid was pretty damn impressive, wasn't he? It was weird to see him in a suit also. So, yeah, Flair yelled a lot and yelled about, Lex not being able to beat him, and he was going to go after the knee. We then get the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette versus Tom Zink and Brian Pillman U.S. Tag Team Championship match. So the backstory for this, really, really quickly, because Cornette's talked about it on his podcast, which, yes, I do listen to it. No, I don't agree with everything Cornette says, but you know what? Wrestling historian Cornette is fun to listen to. Not saying I agree with everything he says about modern wrestling. There are some things where it's like, okay, bit much. But anyway, enough of that. The backstory was, this was supposed to be kind of a way to kick off Brian Pillman being made into a major superstar, where they were the U.S. Tag Team Champions, and it was going to be like, this whole crazy thing where Pillman got his throat injured. He had all those surgeries on his throat from when he was a kid, and they gave him the raspy voice, and he was smaller. He made fun of all this. He had a lot of tough times growing up, and Pillman was supposed to work with the Midnight Express and do this thing where he was going to beat everybody. And then he was going to go on and face Flair, possibly in the singles program. Flair really wanted to make Pillman a star. The problem is Jim Herd didn't want to do that. And Jim Barnett didn't, because Jim Barnett was a goddamn idiot. And if you know anything about Jim Barnett, he may have been smart about wrestling at one time, but he wasn't smart by this point. Pillman pretty much got ruined because of that. And they were the U.S. Tag Team Champions, Pillman and Zink, built up all this stuff where the idea was for them to retain the U.S. Tag Team Championships on a pay-per-view. Well, they didn't do that. Ole was just like, oh, fucking hell. Just give them to the Midnight Express. So Cornette's locked in a cage. Every advantage is for Zink and Pillman to retain, and they don't retain. Now, I like the Midnight Express, and I don't mind seeing them champions, especially at this time, because they were getting beat a whole lot. But the fact that Pillman and Zink were made to look just goddamn ridiculous. I mean, Zink always looked ridiculous anyway, because we're coming up on almost the 30-year anniversary of him doing that crossbody into absolute midair, where he just dived on absolutely nothing because he threw Brian Lee too far. It was on the November Clash, I believe. But anyway, so that was the whole thing. Like, Bobby Eaton gets an inside cradle, 1, 2, 3. Zink gets pinned. At least Zink got pinned. But then we get Sting getting a pop, and he's all celebrated because he's coming back from injury soon. He had just torn his ACL a few months before, just before Wrestle War 90, which is another show I reviewed. Check out the Old School Wrestling Reviews and Documentary Reviews playlist if you would like. You can check that out. You might have to scroll through a little bit, but it's on there. And so Sting's recovering, but he's making an appearance here. Well, this is all about the return of RoboCop. The Horsemen all jump him and throw him in that gimmicked cage. And then RoboCop shows up, walking as fast as he possibly can. I mean, it's such a snail's pace. The Horsemen could have taken a nap before they locked Sting in the cage, locked him in the cage, waking up 8 hours later, and RoboCop would have been about halfway to the ring. And then RoboCop tears the door open, JR having to sell this whole thing. Oh, look at the strength of RoboCop. And then they run him off. Or they run the Horsemen off. The Horsemen were made to look like idiots here. We then get a JYD promo. It was sad to see him at this point because he was really washed. He'd had a lot of issues and everything, and this was pretty much his last full-time run. And he talked about finding himself a bone. Cornette comes out and says, why is JYD here? This is supposed to be the Midnight Express talking about winning the U.S. Tag Team Championships. And he's like, where have you been all this time? And he mentions he mentions an address in Louisville, Kentucky. That's my mama's house. That's right, I'm your daddy. Whatever, it was funny. Rock and Roll Express versus Hayes and Garvin for corporal punishment match. Again, the whipping. It was just a whipping match where, given the corner, you could use the straps and stuff like that. I don't know why they just didn't give him the straps and just let him whip anyway. There were a lot of rest holds. I could have done without that. This was given a lot of time, but the rest holds kind of drug it down. Also because Hayes really wasn't all that good in the ring. Garvin at this point was also pretty washed. And a sunset flip by Morton pins Hayes, I believe. Yeah, Hayes took the pin. And cool. All right. They won the match. Good. Then they whipped the Freebirds a little bit. The fake birds, rather. Doug Furnas interview. Totally forgot that Doug Furnas was in WCW. Some people came and went so quickly that I totally forgot about that. He talks about how Luger is bound determined to get the victory tonight and win the WCW championship. Steiner Brothers versus Doom. Tonight at 11, Doom. Cue the Morbo gif. But I'm not going to put in this, but you know what I'm talking about. If you're a Futurama fan. WCW Tag Team Championship match. Very good. Power for power match. I encourage you guys to check this one out. I'm not even going to try to go through all the moves, but just... yes, there were a few slow spots. And Butch Reed at this point, this is about when he was going to be done doing full-time wrestling. But Ron Simmons was on the ascent. Rick Steiner was coming into his own. Scott Steiner was coming into his own. And it worked. It absolutely worked. It was a great goddamn match. And a double team move knocks Rick down. And the pin, 1, 2, 3. We get new tag team champions, Doom. And they would hold on to him, I think, till Wrestle War 91, which is probably one I'm going to be reviewing really quickly. I'm probably going to be doing a ton of old WCW pay-per-view reviews, because I can do most of them from memory. I can just watch them as a refresher, and also, it gives me content because, sweet Christ, a lot of the WWE product is really weighing down on me, so expect to see a lot more retro stuff. But this match was very goddamn good. Really great stuff. WCW's tag team division for a number of years was goddamn impressive. Even WWE's was. There was a lot of really good tag team wrestling in the late 80s, early 90s that gets forgotten about. At least by some fans. Not by all, but by some. Then Doom and Long celebrate. Theodore R. Long. I just think that makes him sound really snooty, which I know was the point because he was supposed to be a heel. And then we get Luger versus Flair with Woman in a steel cage. Man, Woman trapped around all those cords. She would have bad flashbacks to this about 17 years afterwards. I really should stop saying those. I'm not going to, but I really should stop saying that. If you know, you know. So, steel cage, weird steel cage that they had set up in WCW. And Luger had a staph infection that was previously indicated. This wasn't their best match. It was like a condensed version of stuff that happened at Starrcade and Great American Bash 88. But it was still good. Still a good match. Lex was still the U.S. champion in the midst of having the championship for about 15 months, I believe. 15, 16 months, something like that. He really did do a lot of good with the U.S. championship. And I'm not fond of giving credit to Lex, but he did pretty good. So, we get this one point where he's doing the 10 punches in the corner and Luger's total package right there in Flair's face. And then Flair is busted open. And those two things are unrelated. Thankfully, that would have been scary. So, Flair starts working on Luger's knee, but he keeps coming back. It looks like Luger's going to get the victory, but then the Horsemen are outside the cage. And Ole earlier had been looking at the cage, trying to figure out, how can we get in? What can we do? Let's get to the guy that's controlling the cage, raising it up and lowering it. So, they're trying to do stuff. Sting runs down to try and fight him off. Elegante shows up. Giant Gonzalez, if you don't know. And they run away. He kind of tosses Ole to the side. It was not very good. But then the cage gets raised. Barry Windham makes his appearance and runs in and causes a DQ in a steel cage match. A DQ in a steel cage match. Sometimes older stuff on these older shows just does not fucking work at all. It would be hard to do new stuff on these older shows. And then Ole takes control of the guy who's operating the switch and stuff like that and keeping the Horsemen in there. And then eventually security gets over there. Sting and Elegante get in the ring. Everybody gets run off. And then Sting attacks Flair during his post-match promo. So yeah, the two tag team championship matches were the best ones to watch. The Corporal Punishment whipping match was fine. The main event was fine except for the dodgy finish that kind of took a little bit away from it. This was one of the weaker early 90s WCW pay-per-views. But yeah, expect a lot more retro reviews coming up here. Hopefully, some will be better than I remember. That's not likely, but we'll see what happens. And also expect some older WWE ones. I may even dive into some in your house shows Maybe even some older New Japan stuff. We will see. Anyway, agree, disagree, what I said. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.